Hello, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're coming in from. Lovely to see some familiar faces and some new faces that I haven't seen before. Hi, Tom and Sarah. I can see you there. Wait, Sarah, hi, I saw you. Hi, Stephen. Lisa, I don't think I've met you personally, but I've seen your face before. Have I seen your face before? Yes. Susanna, lovely to see you, Susanna. Tammy, nice to see you. I've seen your face before, but yes. Some of our Herman team, Paul.
Hi.
Matthew, hi, Matthew. Kathleen, lovely to see you, Kathleen, again.
Hello, Rosie.
Ali, nice to see you. Donna, I saw you last time. Rinlet, I think I saw you last time too. Lovely to see everybody. We're just going to give everyone another minute and we're going to get started. Today is a little less structured than a typical session. I do have some slides to keep me on task and to keep me somewhat sequential. But we're really hoping to share some stories in breakouts today. So hopefully you're eagerly anticipating breakout sessions where you'll go into a breakout room with some colleagues and share some of these stories. Brian, welcome. Jane, welcome. Everyone's coming in right on time. Okay, what I'm going to do is get started with my slides. Let me just share my screen. Okay, today's session is about the idea of stories that sell in relation to whole brain thinking and the HBDI. Now, before we begin, I would like to extend my respects to the elders of the lands on which I work, which happen to be the Turrbal and Yagara people. Anyone else in Brisbane? That's the local custodians of the land. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, as we learn today. I also extend my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands on which you might work. And if you come from New Zealand, kia ora, welcome. And it's lovely to have you here today. So what we're going to be talking about, maybe we'll go straight into the overview. As you know, I can't help myself in using our 4 quadrants day in, day out. That's what you're here for. So what are we talking about? Stories that, what is the session about? Sorry. Stories provide a really powerful way to generate engagement, buy-in, and proof of impact. So that's the context in which we're using stories today. Not so much the stories that you might go to watch at a movie, but the stories that really change your mind about something. Why? Well, I just explained that. I always do that. Stories are a great way to connect, but also to help if you're stuck. If you've got someone who's stuck and you need them to see something in a new and different way. We've got 60 minutes together online, and a lot of today's session will be in breakouts. So if you were unprepared for that, I'm just putting it up right up front that we're probably going to spend about 30 minutes in breakouts together and then come back, breakouts, and then come back, because we're going to be talking stories. We're going to be sharing stories. And I'm presenting mostly today, and Michael, I've dragged him in to share a couple of stories too, because he is the wonderful storyteller that he is. So telling your own story is a great place to start. Just give me a wave because I can see a lot of your faces. Who out there is quite a comfortable and confident storyteller? Who uses stories already in the way they facilitate and present and talk? That's now who says I'm kind of, I can see some of this. Who's sort of like, I go there if I need to. I'm probably in the average storyteller category. Who's that? Who's done that? Mid, yeah, when I need to. Who's like, oh, tell me to tell a story and I'm kind of nervous here. Is anyone there? Is anyone feeling that? No, okay. So sometimes a good way to start is with your own story as a way to practice. So I'm going to share one of mine, and then I'm going to get you to go into breakout rooms and do the same thing. So it says one or the most impactful moment of your life so far, and telling it as a story. So I'm going to share a story about a significant moment in my life. When I was in high school, I was in my final year of high school, and one of the subjects that I loved was creative writing. I loved anything creative. In fact, look at my HBDI profile, and one of the keywords is creative. The problem was I wasn't good at it. And so I'd do creative writing and I'd submit the assessment and I'd get 10 out of 20 I get 9 out of 20, which is very disappointing. And it was really frustrating for me because my teacher said to me, and I'll never forget this, maybe you're just not creative. You should probably try something else. And it really upset me because I wanted to say, no, I am a creative person. I just can't show it. But I didn't actually, I started to question, am I creative? Maybe I'm not. I can't do this creative writing stuff. Anyway, enter in Michael Morgan at that time in my life. And Michael took me through a process of explaining something to him. And he said, Rosie, just describe to me a school assembly. And so I did this explanation, thought that's a very basic thing to do. Yep, okay, this is what happens at school in assembly. And I did the explanation. At the end, he said, Rosie, do you realize that you didn't use a single visual descriptor in your explanation of this story? Not one look or color, and I even have trouble giving you examples because I'm not a visual processor. And so what was really fascinating, I didn't know whole brain thinking at the time, but I could be one thing in the whole brain thinking lens, creative, but I could really be missing another thing in the whole brain lens, which is visual processing. Anyway, that's a bit of a side note. So I had this insight about myself. Oh, I don't think in pictures. And that is so true. If I don't see you visually, I can't picture you in my head. I can't picture my children. I can't picture my front door. I can't picture anything. In fact, in recent times, the condition of being unable to visually picture things is called aphantasia. And it's part of a Shane's nodding, and it's part of a neurodiverse way that your brain works. And they've actually started researching it. It's fascinating stuff. So what I did though, what was the impact of that story? So when I went to do my next creative writing, I said, well, if I can't see, then I'm going to write a story about a person who can't see. So I wrote the story of a blind woman experiencing the death of her husband while she's sitting in a chair. Now, because she was blind, she didn't need any visual processing. And so I wrote this story about this lady experiencing the death of her husband. And I submitted it, and it was they're called trial exams in Australia. But anyway, I submitted it, and the teacher goes away and marks it. And when she's handing them out, I remember this teacher saying, I don't know whose this one is, couldn't quite match it to a person. And I said, is it about a blind lady? She said, yes, but it won't be yours. And I thought, that's interesting. I said, yeah, that is my story. It was about blah, blah. She said, oh, and handed it to me. That story that I submitted, I received a mark of 19 out of 20. And what that impactful moment taught me and what it led me to was the entire journey that I'm on today. It triggered my interest in self-awareness, self-insight, self-discovery, and by learning something about yourself, the transformational impact that can have on you when you apply the right strategy. And that's the beginning of my story as a psychologist. I went away to understand how my brain worked and why it was different and what I could bring. And that was the beginning of it, because I had that impactful moment that Michael actually opened the door to. So we all have these different moments and different stories. What I'd love you to do is to go into breakout rooms, and we're going to have breakout rooms of about 3 or 4 people. And I'd love you to think about a story that you could share in your life. Doesn't have to be you. Mine was pretty well rehearsed because I share that story a lot, because it's a profound one for me. But I want you to think about a story for you in your context that was a profoundly impactful moment you had. And I'd like you to share it with your other colleagues in that breakout. So Kate, I think the lovely Kate's been busy organising breakouts in my absence.
Yes, we're good to go.
Thank you. So you're going to get an alert to join the breakout. We're going to have 10 minutes in this breakout to share the story. If you've got one, share one. If you've got 2, share 2. But this is about your a story about an impactful moment in your life. I'll see you back here soon. Love it. Love it. Sorry, team, we're just having our own Herman story sharing session as well. Thanks for coming back. I'll just give the others a minute to join back into the group. How was that for you guys? The group, you come back a bit sooner. How was it? Helpful? Interesting? Easy? Hard?
Bit of all of that, I think.
Yeah.
Possibly.
No, we were cut short. We were getting good stories.
Sorry, team. We're actually going to go back to those same breakouts with next breakout and then the one after that, because I thought you're probably making a bit of a connection with those stakeholders in there. So welcome back. Thank you for coming back and joining me. You can still see my slides, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I'd love to just in the chat, because I want to get as much intel from all of you as possible. What rather than the story itself, because we, as the Herman team, we shared our stories too. What were the things that made a story impactful just then? Like, what was it that you went, oh, that was a really good story? Or if you struggled to tell a story, you were like, Rosie, you put me on the spot here. I don't know what to say. If you felt that, what was happening? So in the chat, if you could click on the chat for me, and all I want you to do is to capture some of the themes that came out of storytelling exercise. What was it about? What made it helpful, powerful? What made it challenging? So we can extrapolate this. We can use it in other storytelling situations. Being vulnerable is challenging. Yes. Sorry, I just saw that comment pop up. Yeah, you got to pick your audience, pick your story. All right, I'm just going to quickly have a read. Human connection is everything, deep personal experiences, the ability to relate, resilience and hard work, relatable themes. Yep, make it easier. Setting a time and place and the mood, making it relatable, personal testimony, personal experience, being vulnerable, posing questions, personal impactful. We can really hear from the language that's coming through, narration, vulnerability. We're really strongly in the red quadrant right now. We've really deep dived into that quadrant. Not necessarily how you told your story might not have been red quadrant, but we are in that space. Imagining myself in other people's shoes, overcoming hardships. Hero journey was the main theme. Yeah, interesting. Failure to rebirth. I don't know if many of you had that, but I was noticing that theme in our stories too. A lot of the stories were like, this was the problem, or this was the challenge, or this was the blocker. I'm going to call it a blocker later. And then this was the resolution from that blocker. They're powerful. They give me goosebumps just talking about it. I don't know, just me. Challenge of being unprepared. Yeah, throwing you in the deep end to have to tell a story. We had that in our group too. The outcome. Yeah, absolutely. Donna said that. What actually happened as a result. That's wonderful. Okay. Oh, we've got some fabulous answers in the chat there. So that's a kind of personal story, very, very red quadrant. I just want to give you some intel into what the neuroscience is happening, what's happening in your brain when you're telling a story like that. So a couple of things are happening. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, and it's going off when you hear a story that's someone sharing, and it's related to being an emotionally charged situation, having a feeling connected to it. And it makes it easier to remember. I often get told by certified practitioners, oh, Rosie, I remember that story you told in CERT. And that's one of the most common things I hear back is I remember that story you told. And it's because of the connection with an emotional event and the story. It's the neurotransmitter dopamine's firing. So just then we all had some dopamine firing off, and we might remember those stories, particularly if they had a personal connection to us. The other thing that is happening in your brain is neural coupling. So your story is activating a part of your brain that allows the listener to convert it into their own ideas. And you use the word connect a lot in that. And that's what neural coupling is about. It's about aligning and making those connections in your brain. There's also syncing that happens when they hook you up to a brain scan machine. They recognize that the syncing between brains, so brains start to have similar wave patterns when they're telling and sharing a story between the listener and the storyteller. And the other important thing about storytelling is it actually activates the motor and prefrontal cortex of your brain. Now, if you remember in a session, if you've been coming to these sessions for a while, and I talked about when people are feeling stuck and that their neocortex can't fire, something to do with the amygdala and probably going too deep. But when you are stuck with something, it's very hard to activate your neural cortex because you're in your primitive, more reflexive brain. But what storytelling does is it provides a gateway to open up that neocortex. So someone who's quite anxious or nervous, I mean, I'm not saying they tell the story, but being told a story to them starts to activate that part of the brain and connect with them. So there's some kind of neuroscience reasons why a story is powerful. Now, the next kind of thing I want to talk about, this was a structure, sorry, it's a little bit blurry, but we use a lot of the winning by design framework in a lot of our sales initiatives. And there are lots of different frameworks out there, but the reason that I chose this, and it actually really links to what you just shared with me in what made the story powerful, there was a structure, whether you were aware of it or not. And the structure was sharing the context of what was happening. So in my story, creative writing is the context. And the pain was I was failing at it and I was being told I was crap at it. And it was really upsetting me, but I'm quite a fighter. So I was like, no, this is not me. You're not going to tell me about myself. That's my brain. It's always worked that way. Tell me to go clean my room. I'll go, no. Tell me, would you like to clean your room? I would, actually. I would like to. That was me as a child. So there's a pain in the story, which you might have heard, and then the impact, the outcome, what did it mean? And so, along the lines there, so from pain to impact, that is where you're promoting the solution or the insight or the aha moment or the penny drop moment. And that's why it's powerful. So that's a bit on the structure. But let's hear a couple more stories. So Michael's in a shared this one, and this Michael might have forgotten because I talked to him about it yesterday and I changed the title. I've called it the penny drop moment, Michael, do you remember the story yesterday? I don't want to give away the punchline.
About the lady?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I think just to set the scene, I guess we've all got lots of stories. Which story I tell depends very much, obviously, on the context. We all know with the HBDI that it has very high face validity, and as practitioners, we love that aha moment. And I remember talking to somebody, and I wanted to get across, the power of the HBDI and how powerful that aha moment was. And this actually happened. I was running a workshop in the Hunter Valley, and there were 12 people in the room, and they happened to work for Westpac. So they were all strong A quadrant. They were all in suits. There were 12 of them, and 11 of them were men, and one was this woman. But honestly, it was hard to tell the difference. And I was running the workshop, debriefing the HBDI, and suddenly, out of nowhere, the lady stood up and sort of shrieked and said, "My God, I'm ruining my marriage." And so you could have heard a pin drop. And I looked at her and I said, "Well, what?" And we were halfway through debriefing, and she just said, "I've suddenly realized," she said, "my husband and I are renovating a terraced house in Sydney, and one of us had to give up work to manage the process. And because I'm in the bank and I'm highly paid, we decided that I should keep my job. So he's managing the project." And she said, "Last week I came home late one night and he met me at the door with this color sheet, and he waved it around and said, 'Hi, honey, I'm glad you're home. What color do you think we should do the kitchen wall? This one or this one?' And she said, I just looked at him and said, 'Oh, John, I've had such a busy day. It's not important. You decide.'" And she paused again, and then she looked around the room and she said, "I've suddenly realized the impact that had." And she sat down.
Thanks, Michael. Great story. So we're going to morph into stories about HBDI now, because that's ultimately what we're about. I want to share one. If you haven't heard it, it's the Thomas the Tank Engine story, but I've actually got the profile of the person so you can see and connect it to their profile. So this was the profile of a stakeholder, a male, in a workshop I ran, who was very adamant that as we were debriefing the HBDI, "I am a different person at home. I'm a completely different person at home. This is not right. I'm different at home." And as we were going through the report, I had a look at this 2-page summary, and there's one big clue for me that highlights he could be different at home in one small way. And if you can have a look, you can put in the chat if you can pick out what that is. So when I said, "Oh, we're going to get to that in the process. You're different at home." I said, tell me more about what you mean when you say I'm different at home." And he said, "Well, in my free time, aka think hobbies, Thanks, Steph. Yep. I like to spend time with my family, and that's all I do. I spend time with my family. I said, oh, that's great. You're right. So in your free time, there's a red quadrant showing up. Let's have a look at your profile here and look what's showing up there. Hobbies are showing up in the red quadrant. Very aligned, very connected with what you're telling me. I said, but what I'd like you to do is tell me, I try not to use his name, John, tell me about what you do with your family. Tell me about your hobbies. He's like, right, well, every night I read to my son. I have the full collection of Thomas the Tank Engine. I pass it down to him. And so every night we read Thomas the Tank Engine. And we go through the first of the series and we go all the way back and then we start again. It's great. I said, oh, wonderful. Do you ever let your son pick a different story? No. He knows it's Thomas the Tank Engine at 7 o'clock every night and we go through the series. Oh, so you wouldn't ever create a new story or pick a different genre? No. And as he started to respond to these follow-up questions, he started laughing. And what he started to recognize, as you would be hearing, is that the way he's accessing his red quadrant is through his very blue-green thinking preferences. And he was saying, wow, so I can actually see myself. He sees that as red thinking. And I said, well, what is actually red thinking? Yes, red thinking is connecting, but how you are connecting is through your preferences. And what is so powerful about that story is that HBDI won't tell you what you're capable of. Everyone's capable of all quadrants, but it might give you some very significant insight into how you do that and how you process those different situations. So that's one of my favorite stories. And I went and searched for the profile because you can see it coming out in the data, but you can also see that showing up in the way he was responding to me. So one of the things about that was me looking into the data and trying to connect it and also asking him the question, tell me more about that. Give me the example of, and I let him fall into his own thinking preference and manifest it for us in front of the whole group. The whole group could see it much quicker than he could see it. And that was his penny drop moment. And the reason I share that story is he was telling me the whole time, very, very loudly, I don't agree with my profile. I don't agree with my profile. I don't agree with my profile. So that's one example. You might have your own examples there. Okay, I'm going to move to another story. This is the I can't do that story about the drawing, Michael.
Okay, yeah. I was running a creative thinking workshop, and because that's, you know, the birthplace of, I guess, Ned and his model and everything else. And I was running this workshop and I was doing a drawing exercise from a lady called Betty Edwards, and the drawing is called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, where she teaches people to draw by turning the picture upside down. So you've got to copy this picture. So you turn the original upside down, and then you do your drawing upside down. And the idea is that it destroys the meaning, because most of us don't draw what we see, we draw what we think we see. Whereas, you know, if it doesn't make sense, you draw one line in relation to the other. And it was a group of managers from the Steelworks, BHP, in Wollongong. And this guy at the end of the table had done his drawing and he was sitting there and he had tears running down his cheeks. And as a facilitator, I thought, oh my God, what do I do? So I went down and sat next to him and I just looked at him and I said, are you all right? Which was a ridiculous thing to ask because obviously he wasn't. But I said, you know, are you all right? And he said, no. And, you know, my heart sort of missed a beat. He said, no. And he pulled his picture up and he showed it to me and he said, I can't do this. And there was a sort of silence. And he said, I'm 52 and I've lived my entire life believing that I couldn't do this. That was it. I did hear 6 months later that he quit his job and he went to do other things. And I don't know what happened to him in the end, but yeah, I can't do that. It was a very profound moment and also made me realize as a facilitator how, yes, unprepared I was for moments like that. but wow. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. So I think the reason I asked Michael to share and we're sharing these is because I'm trying to illustrate that this is the power of what we have at our fingertips, this ability to share these profound, insightful moments for people and to have those penny drop moments. There's one more story I'll share and then we're going to go back into breakouts. This is a profile of a CEO in an organization, and I was working with the leadership team, and he had engaged me to run this session to get alignment within his team and to create the strategy, or to, he didn't say create, he said to implement the strategy of the next 12 months. So I ran the standard, the first part was the standard model, start thinking, getting to know the quadrants into your HBDI. And so I had a morning tea break before I gave out the profiles. And he'd actually already seen his profile, and that's how he'd come across it. So he knew his profile. So I talked about the model and the quadrants. Then we had a break. Then we came back to look at the HBDI. And when we came back to look at the HBDI, whipped out his computer, he opened it, and he spent the whole session like this. Didn't participate, didn't engage, didn't respond, didn't contribute, nothing. Completely disengaged. And I was freaking out. I'm like, CEO, massive client, big organization, I've stuffed this. I've monumentally stuffed this session. And it wasn't, he was so engrossed in what he was doing, it wasn't even appropriate for me to go and check in or anything like that. No, I'm doing this. So at the end of the session, which was then at lunchtime, he slammed his computer down and he said, that was great session. And I said to him, you know what, you could have blown me over by saying that it was a great session. I'm shocked because all I saw was, or what I interpreted was that you were not engaged, didn't enjoy it. And he said, oh, no. What you did, Rosie, was you taught me about these quadrants, and I'm facilitating the next sessions for the next afternoon and into the next day. And I haven't got a single why in any of my slide decks. And so what he was actually doing was he was going through the facilitation that he was running for the next day and a half, and he was inserting the why into it. This is why, this is why, this is why. So he was modifying his slides. And I said, wow, that's really fascinating. If we pull out your profile, he said, yeah, I can see. I just didn't think they needed to know why. They just have to do it. They just have to get on with it. CEO in a big organization. I said, it's a really interesting point. I think what you might want to do is explain that story to your stakeholders before you go and show your slides, because I just want to step you out of your own thought process and think about what was happening to the others in the room then. And so he said, oh yeah, sit down, have lunch with us, talk me through it. And what I tried to do was explain from a red and yellow perspective the experience of the other participants, with the CEO disconnecting, disengaging, and modeling that behavior, and how that might show up in other times as in his leadership. And it was a really profound, insightful moment. One for me as a facilitator recognized, no, he actually wasn't disengaged. My assumptions were completely incorrect, but also to kind of navigate that and call it out in an appropriate way. So very interesting scenario in that story. So I'm sure you probably have your own stories that you'd like to talk about or share, or maybe just decompress about. Maybe you've had a story that you haven't turned into a story like I've shared. Maybe you just had an experience. If you're not comfortable telling stories, just say that I had this experience, because that in itself is actually a story. So back into the breakouts in 10 minutes again, I want you to share a significant or aha moment or a story of impact that you've had, either personally as a facilitator, or that a participant might have had in relation to using whole brain thinking and the HBDI. If you like, it could be your own personal insight story, if you'd like to share that, or if you'd like to share something of more of a group nature, you can share that too. So I'm going to send you back into breakouts, 10 minutes to have a think about that and have a chat with your colleagues. Thank you, Kate. Hey, team, welcome back. Everyone's joining us. Thank you for coming back. Did we get some whole brain stories coming out? Excellent. Okay. So, it might still be counting down. I'll give everyone another minute to return back. Share screen. Okay. Well, they're liking their stories in room 4 and 5. In the chat while we wait, I'm going to ask this question again. So you'll notice that after the stories, I did broadcast this slide in to say, what are you noticing about the stories? Hey team, who's joining us back now? You've been kicked out of the breakout rooms. Lovely to have you all back. Thank you. For those who arrived early, I was just saying that half-ish way through, I broadcast some questions, some clue spotting questions into the breakout to try and shift the conversation into not just telling the stories, but now thinking about clue spotting the stories and what makes a powerful story based on your audience, based on your experience. So some of the things I asked, what made the story powerful? I think that related to a question I asked earlier already. Does what made it powerful relate to any particular quadrants? Which ones might have been showing up? Was there a pattern there? Was it about impact? Was it about connection? Was it about everything? And what did you notice about the structure of the story, if anything? So anything that you might, I can see some chat coming through, wonderful. Anything that you, I missed the questions. Did the questions broadcast or did I stuff that up? Oh, everyone's, sorry, tech failure issue. So you just talked about questions. It's fine, doesn't matter, no problem. What I would then ask, and this is something that I would run in groups as well. Do an activity, clue spot the activity. It's a common thing I do in facilitation. Participate and clue spot. And you'll notice that my stories are trying to get quadrants coming out. What made it powerful? Identify the blue. Does what made it powerful relate to particular quadrants? That's connection, yellow connecting. What ways does it align to your thinking preferences? Red. What did you notice about the structure of the story? Green. So there's always a method, and sometimes groups will just answer one question, sometimes they'll answer all four, sometimes they'll debate which question is the best or why I asked a particular question. But what I want to kind of wrap up with is some of the ways that you can access stories from us. Now, I was going to share this one. How long do I have? Okay, 58 minutes. So we have client-based stories that tell the use and application, and these are best used in the very beginning when you're trying to maybe get a deal across the line. You can go into YouTube and you can click on client success stories. This one's about Nespresso, and the theme of this is using whole brain thinking in a coaching culture. So we've got Nespresso, we've got Swinburne Uni, we've got Woolworths, we've got Suntory, we've got lots of stories there. So do familiarize yourself if you want to use story with some of these in the future. I'm going to share quickly. Sorry. I'm not going to show it. You can do that in your own time. This is the Suntory one. So what I might do with Kate when she follows up the email for the session today, I'll just get her to link to these success stories, and that will send you out to them and just get you hearing them. The Suntory one's a great one around cognitive diversity. So if cognitive diversity is a theme you're trying to talk about, then have a look at the story, see if it's something you want to share in relation to your audience as well. Okay, I'm going to wrap up. Oh, sorry, when I click that, it goes into the story. So case studies also share stories, YouTube shares stories. So let me wrap up in a whole brain way. A whole brain view of stories that sell. What do you need to think about? Well, first of all, the red quadrant, you need to think about the connection. The person that you're telling the story to needs to see themselves in the story that is being told. So that is what a lot of you might have recognized in the stories you were sharing. Did you see yourself in the stories? And when you did, were they more powerful stories? So that's about the story. The stories also need to be authentic. You'll notice it's harder to tell a story that someone else told about something. When it happened to you, it's much easier to tell. So think about the stories that happen to you. And that's why we like to have diverse experiences in life. I share a lot of my failures in certification of failure stories because they're so powerful to learn from. So they're authentic. That's the red. The yellow quadrant is a story. We talked about stories and the idea that you're trying to change your mindset. Because you're trying to achieve something different, something else. A stuck mind needs a new perspective. That's why. So when you notice a stuck mind, you go, what story could I share with them? And that goes into the blue. You need to understand what the thing that they're being stuck on is so that you choose the right story. I don't agree with my profile. I don't agree with my profile. Well, what is it that they don't agree with? I had someone who didn't agree with the profile. When we looked further, we discovered that it was actually about what they prefer to do versus what they're competent doing, blah, blah, blah. Here's my example. choose the right story for the right situation, relevant to the block. And if you want to use whole brain thinking as a way to structure your stories, this is a way to do it. Share the context. What's the situation and what's happening? Rosie's failing creative writing. What's the big idea? Rosie thinks she can do creative writing, but she's not sure how, and she's frustrated by it. The solution, Rosie's going to write creative writing in a different way because she learned that she doesn't process pictures. She processes through sounds and feelings, through auditory means and kinesthetic means. So she's going to use that in her next story. Impact. The impact was the change in the marks of the story. Rosie went from failing creative writing to being near top of the class. And the teacher was like, this isn't possible. You can't make a change like that so quickly. And it was really about unlocking something that couldn't exist there. So that brings us to the end of our session today. I'd like to thank you all for sharing. And if you've heard a story that you think, wow, that needs to be shared more broadly, or you shared a story you think, I think my story needs to be shared more broadly, I'd love to hear from you. So please feel free to get in touch, because these stories are the stories that keep this powerful, that keep this alive, and that support you in your facilitation.